Good afternoon and welcome to the January meeting of the Town of Newbury Human Resources Board. It is 4:08. We are calling the meeting to order. Present are
Diane Doyle.
Mark Gleckman.
Anthony Antico.
Lane Shaddy.
And the other two members of the HR Board have unavoidable conflicts today. They will not be joining us, but we do have a quorum of 4. And so we are off and running. The meeting is called to order. First order of business to approve the prior minutes of the meeting held on December 27th. I'd ask everyone just to take a moment and read through that. So everyone had a chance to read through? With that, I'll accept the motion to accept the minutes as written.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing now, all in favor of the minutes as read, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Employee issues, when Chief Lucy sent me his note indicating he was unable to make it today, he mentioned that there were no employee issues currently that he was aware of. Diane, anything that you're aware of in Town Hall?
Nope.
Personnel actions and job vacancies, I know that the police department has got at least one of the two or both of the communications officers now on board, is that correct?
There was one additional part-time and then we have one full-time. And I know that John was still looking into it for at least
Okay.
one more, but
Thank you.
I'm not aware of any openings at this point, other than the communications.
Right, other
But
than
other
service
than
state.
that, I
Okay,
think we're,
good. No other personnel actions that you're aware of? Workplace or discrimination or ethics issues, none that have hit my plate? Haven't heard anything there. Good, that's a good thing. Safety issues, John Lucy indicated that there were no safety issues. The guidance that we talked about briefly last month is still in place relative to Town Hall. As evidenced by this meeting, Town Hall is still open for business. Masks are recommended, in circumstances where you can't be at least 6 feet separated from those next to you. Otherwise, masks are suggested, but certainly not a requirement at this point. I know that the command group is monitoring that on a day-to-day, weekly basis, depending on what's happening with Omicron and in our community. But so far, I think we've weathered the storm about as well as a small community can, knock wood, right? Thank you. Safety issues?
no safety issues that I can think of. I know that Deb Rogers, the director of our Board of Health, had emailed us last week to indicate that we could go on the covidtest.gov to order your individual COVID test that would be
Right.
delivered. I'm sure most of you have seen it on the news. So she did make us all aware of that. So if anyone hasn't done that, you can go on and order up to, I think it's 4 free tests through the
Great.
through the Gov website.
Right. Thank you, Dan. Other business, personnel policy update. Fair to say that Diane has done more than yeoman's work here over these last few months in everything from multiple reads of the entire document, all 63 pages, thank you, and catching a number of things, some of which are just wordsmithing, just modernizing the language, changing things from select board oriented to town administrator act oriented. Diane has been very diligent in working with the folks from town council's office, reviewing a couple of the more substantive issues that she caught that we'll talk about tonight. Pleased to report that we are just about there. Final edits are taking place. Just a couple of what I would call cleanup kinds of questions of back and forth between Diane and the town council's office. The hope is that that final cleanup of language will be done in the next 24 hours such that it can be put in front of the select board tomorrow for their review and hopefully a vote.
Actually, we won't meet tomorrow's meeting,
It
because we
won't be?
wouldn't have been put on the agenda.
Oh, it didn't make the agenda, okay, then it'll be a next month's meeting.
Yeah,
Which
so-
gives us a little bit of,
Right.
a little bit of fudge time if necessary to go back and forth with some other editing, so. Diane, with that, why don't I turn it over to you and you can share with Tony and Lynn what some of the more substantive issues are that were changed.
Okay.
By the way, I think, and town council agree with this, even though we have no formal role in this process in terms of the adoption of the language changes, that's strictly a select board matter, according to the charter of the town, according to the bylaws. But we thought that what would be appropriate is after Diane explains what substantive changes were made, that this board would just take a vote to pass it through to the select board for their review and hopefully their adoption in the next month or so, which I think we talked about a little bit last
We
week.
did.
So with that in mind, Diane?
So, my apologies for getting this to you at 1 o'clock today, but,
That's when you got it.
that's when I got it. Mark joined us on Thursday when Tracy and myself and town council went through page by page the changes. And we thought it made sense for Mark, as chairman of the board, to join us on that call. So we were on the phone for about an hour, and as Mark indicated, most of the changes are where you see select board change to town administrator, or select board being referenced as the appropriate, rather than board of selectmen, it's now select board. Or if it's been changed from select board to town administrator, that is from the a review of the Town Administrator Act, that some of the responsibilities, as town council went through the document, this is our first revision of a document that we brought together, 3 years ago. So some things needed to be updated from the Town Administrator Act perspective, updating the select board title. So I'm not gonna go through all of those, but I can speak to, as Mark said, the substantial or the more robust changes that were made. And I've made copies of the pages and I put them in front of you. So if we could cruise to page, unless anybody has any questions, I'm gonna jump to those two main sections and then we can open it up for discussion. But page 13, which really is page 14, the health insurance retiree benefit that the town employees receive upon retirement. What prompted the review of this section was that back in last summer, we had an employee who retired. And the language on page 13 under section B speaks to the way that it was written. There was a case precedent and also a recommendation based on that case precedent and the retirement that happened in, I think it was July or late summer, that you can't discriminate on retirees and whether or not they receive health insurance benefits based on age. So we needed to update this section, and the recommendation is that the section which details what retirees are eligible for falls basically to their creditable service under the Essex Regional Retirement System. So the language that you have in front of you on page 14 or I guess it's 13, health insurance plans, which is now going to be paragraph C, mirrors what people are eligible for when they retire from Essex County or Essex Regional Retirement System. So it takes away the discriminatory language that we had in our prior policy, if you will, only allowing certain employees to retire at certain ages with certain numbers of years of service. And that was in contrast to a case that came about when we looked at this retiree that took place in late summer.
Thank you.
So,
That case is not ongoing, is it?
no,
I assume he went into litigation?
Yeah, and actually, what was ironic, it did go into litigation. What was ironic was that case was pending, or was already complete when we drafted this. So when we sent it off to town council in March of 2019, that case had actually already been resolved. So it was something that was missed.
They just didn't catch it.
They just didn't catch it.
Okay.
So it came up when we had a retiree, and we started looking at it, and we had someone who had a significant number of years of service, eligible to retire under the Essex County retirement system, but because of his age, he wasn't gonna be receiving benefits. But when we brought this to town council for a legal opinion, that's when they discovered the case precedent, which required us to change the language here.
Okay. Good synopsis.
Does that make sense? Does anybody, I mean, so what, you know.
So this basically matches the litigation.
It matches the litigation, which refers to the fact that you can't discriminate, you can't have different pools of, I think that's how they phrased it on Thursday, you can't have different pools of retirees eligible based on different ages and different years of creditable service. So the recommendation was to go strictly by Essex Regional, which is prior to 78, prior to April 2nd of 2012, after 2012. And so based on those categories with Essex Regional, you would hit certain, and it's also just segregated by group type. So police officers, for example, are group 4, and if you read this, it references group 4, groups 1 and 2. Groups 1 and 2 are clerical, administrative, town employees. Group 4 would be considered our police force. So we spent a lot of time on this particular section on Thursday, but it mirrors Essex Regional, and it does comply with the legal opinion that we got based on the retiree that took place in late summer and based on the case precedent. I think the case was called Kaminsky, and it was somebody that was looking to retire, and they said you're not going to qualify. But then when she brought the case forward, they said you can't discriminate. She had multiple years of service, but she hadn't hit a certain age, and that's when they determined you can't discriminate based on age and retirement based on years of service as well.
There was no appeal filed?
Nope.
Okay.
Kaminsky, I can find the reference for it, but it was Kaminsky was the name of the case.
Question?
Yep.
So I see that the language has been added on the second page,
Yes.
you know, halfway down. So that, the stricken language is the language that's being taken out, right? Like employees, dependents, retirees, surviving spouses, under section C. So stricken is taken out throughout this whole,
The only part that's stricken is where it talks about the ones that are actually drawn through employees, dependents, retirees, and spouses. That is stricken, but it's, I don't know if I made a copy of it, but page 13 was, it was in the document. I can pass it around.
yeah, no, this is
No,
this,
I think everyone's got it.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
page 13 under B, that's what the language was prior.
Yeah.
So that whole section is being stricken because it talks about 20 years of service and reach the age of 55, over 55 with 15 years of service, and that is where the discriminatory
Yep.
Language is. And so this section, section B, which in the document that I emailed was stricken completely, is being replaced by C under retiree and retirees dependent spouse coverages, which is in italics and has been added.
okay, so, so the new section B, special coverage employees, and then the new section C, health insurance plans,
Yes,
and that's where you took out some of the definitions or the percentages, you took those out?
they just took out those percentages.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay,
And the other thing I'll point out is in the first paragraph of section C, where it references county retirement system, that was supposed to have been changed to Essex Regional Retirement System, not county. It's not considered a county retirement, it's Essex Regional. And that was supposed to have been changed when I got the draft today, but I read it again and it hadn't been changed.
Okay, and then, I'm just kind of clarifying so that I can support, the changes. So, under additional eligibility coverage.
Yes.
When she attains the age of 55, regardless of creditable years of service, et cetera. So those age references are fine according to your review and discussion?
The age reference there is fine because it pertains to the Essex County retirement rules of retirement based on different dates certain. So for example, January 1st, 1978, if someone's entered into the Essex County retirement system prior to that date, they have to only hit 55. Now, if someone's entered into service prior to 1978, they've probably worked for 30 or 40 years and they most likely would have reached 55, but they don't. Most of those people are already retired at this point because they've entered into the retirement system prior to 1978. So if they were 20 at the time and they've now worked an additional 42 or 43 years, most of them are over 55 and are looking to retire now and have probably 40 years of service.
Yeah.
So and I understand, and Lynn, that you bring up a good point, that reference to age in these specific cases tie back to the rules of retirement with Essex County retirement. So, and that's so for example, I came on board in 2010. So I knew in 2010 what my Essex County retirement membership meant and what my eligibility would be. So these age references and dates are very specific to Essex County.
Okay.
And so they're not discriminatory in nature because they were defined at the time of enrollment in the system.
Okay. Okay, good.
I think does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. Full-time, part-time employees?
So full-time employees, anybody that's an enrollment, that are enrolled in the Essex County retirement system. So to be a member of the Essex County retirement system, you have to work a minimum of 20 hours per week, 52 weeks a year. And so
is that, sorry to interrupt,
Nope.
Is that defined in here? Let's see.
It's
right here,
defined
second paragraph.
It's defined here, but it's also defined at the beginning of the entire policy.
Okay.
And I appreciate your questions because this is really the first, we lived and breathed this document for many months.
Yep.
So I appreciate the fact that you're seeing this now and looking at some of these changes. So to be in Essex, you are required to join the Essex Regional Retirement System if you work over 20 hours or more on a permanent part-time basis. So for a full-time employee, they are earning full-time creditable service. So for every year that I work, I gain 1 year of creditable service.
Okay.
For a part-time employee who works 20 hours, they're gaining part-time status. So you'd have to work 2 years to get 1 year of service. But they are eligible based on the criteria of Essex Regional. They have to join at 20 hours or more.
What is the definition of full-time? I'm just curious.
At the beginning of the document, it is, full-time is referenced at, I think, 35.
35, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Are most employees 40 or?
So we have different categories. Our police and our DPW work 40 hours per week. Administrative staff here work 35, which are the hours that we're open. We have librarians that work, sometimes they're prorated, so they're open 32 hours a week. We do have some people that are 20 hours a week because of the nature of the job that they do. They're only required to be here, say 4 days, 5 hours per day. So there's not really, predominantly it's 35. Council on Aging, we have a couple of employees, well they're now up to 32 to 35. So it's 40 for DPW, police, and fire, and then the rest are typically 35, and there are some that are somewhere between 20 and 32.
Okay. Thank you. If I had looked at this, I would have seen 20 hours is in here.
Yep, so you have to become a member at 20. If you're not 20 hours or more, you're considered what we call a fractional employee or
Okay.
part-time, not permanent part-time, but part-time. And those individuals have to join what's called the OBRA Smart Plan through the state. And that is in lieu of Social Security, because we're a
Oh.
municipality, we don't withdraw Social Security,
Mm-hmm.
but we are required to put equal amounts of Social Security, 7.5% into an OBRA plan for them.
And then do you pay Medicare on top of that?
We do.
Okay.
So the language that's presented here mirrors the Essex County retirement rules and regulations of retiring. And we've stricken the way that the language was written before, which really didn't speak to categories of individuals and when they joined the system. It really only spoke to age and years of service, which was determined to be discriminatory based on the case precedent. Yep.
I'm just thinking out loud here before we get to the second of the two. Right?
Okay.
Use some guidance on this, given the fact that, I mean, Diane's been working chapter and verse on this for months. I got a little bit more involved in it this past week, as Diane mentioned, sitting in on that phone call, much of which was Greek to me. Tony and Lynn, you're seeing it for the first time, both of you. If anyone feels uncomfortable today, voting on moving this forward to the, endorsing the new language and moving it forward to the select board, I'm certainly comfortable deferring our vote on it until our next session, since it's not scheduled to go onto the select board's agenda until at least 2 weeks from now, if not a month from now, depending on how jammed their next session is. So let me open this up for discussion. If either of you, if any of you are uncomfortable with the prospect of taking sort of the straw vote tonight, if you will, more than happy to defer.
So I have a thought, what about our other two board members?
Yep. They
How-
received the document
Yep.
today, as everyone did, but haven't had a chance to weigh in.
So this is, impactful
Yep.
on employees. And so, I had some questions, I feel comfortable with it, but because it's not going before the select board for another month, might it be something to just bring it back? And, I would probably like to kind of look at it and cross-reference and kind of, dig into the policies a little bit more. Being new, I really
Right.
haven't familiarized myself too much with the policies. And so
Absolutely.
my questions are elementary, right, that I'm asking, like, what is the definition of full-time? So if the board felt like it would be useful to put the vote off to move it forward to the
Right.
select board for another
Right.
month, I don't think there's any harm there, because we're not on their agenda for this month.
They meet twice a month. It's possible they
Oh.
could get into the agenda 2 weeks from now, but I don't think this is enough of a code red that we can't say to the select board, we would like everyone in the HR board in attendance to have an opportunity to say that, John Farrar is a benefits expert,
Yeah,
right? Insurance benefits expert, so I would love to get his input as well. So, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking I'm probably not comfortable taking the vote myself tonight, given that there is a lot of substantive new language that people might want to cross-reference and get other opinions on. So, Diane, I know that we.
No,
we thought-
I respect that comment, and I want to make sure that when this does go before them, that it is 100% complete, ready to go. And, I think what we could do is we can hash out these couple of ones that are more substantial, and what we could do is go back to town council and sort of have our final.
Yep.
And I can get that out to folks next week.
I think that's a great idea.
And we can also make sure that what we do is we get ourselves scheduled on the select board's agenda, knowing that we will take a vote at the next meeting.
Right.
So if in fact the select board meets a couple of days or day or a week after we do, we'll already be on the agenda,
Right.
knowing that we'll be ready to move this
Right.
forward.
They would
And I-
typically, a month from now, they will typically meet the day after, they're twice a month on Tuesday nights. So the other option is that if we hear that the select board would really like to get this on and then off their docket 2 weeks from tomorrow, The other option would be for me to check and see
Special board meeting?
if we have an opportunity to hold a special 10-minute meeting for the purposes of discussing just this one item.
Another question, is anybody scheduled to retire under either one of these policies in the very near future?
No.
Do people typically retire when they reach a certain age and years of service, or, you know, how does it work with this town? I mean, is there kind of a, you know, expected like June 1st, you know, people are going to retire, if they are going to, do they need to put in notice of intent to retire?
They do need to put in a notice of intent to retire with Essex Regional, because it does take, Essex Regional has to entertain the request to retire. They have to do a full review of the retirees' information, years of service. They have to make sure that they review and they put it before the Essex County Retirement Board for a vote to accept the retirement. So it does take a couple of months once you make the decision, and so I think that answers your question. What was the other part of your question?
So I guess my primary question is, do we have anyone that is going to retire in the very near future that this could impact either way?
Not in the next, not in the next month or so. But I know what the other part of your question was. Do we have a date certain, or when do people typically retire? So people can retire at any time during the year, because people start their jobs at any point. So
Sure.
you might have, like for myself, I joined in March of 2010. So I want to, maybe my goal is to reach a certain number of years. So a number of years for me might be, you know, March. It may be, for someone else, it might be in October.
Okay.
So there's never a certain time frame, June 1st, July 1st, or, you know, December 31st. It's typically dependent upon personal preference, years of service, age. So when you look at what your benefit will be as an Essex County retirement retiree, Essex County retirement retiree, your pension amount is based on a combination of age and years of service.
Yep.
So it really depends on its personal preference. I mean, we do get a lot of people that hit 65. They can get there, as long as they're qualifying for their benefits, they're getting a MedEx plan from us, they're going on to Medicare Part A and B. So we do get a lot of people at 65, that seems to be a triggering number. Others, it might be, oh, I'm 65, but I might want to get one more year of service. So there's no defined,
Given the size of the population and the demographics, yeah, there's no norm.
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing, if we can go back to the question about taking up a vote at the next meeting, the only thing that would preclude us from, say, taking a vote and being on the next agenda a few days later is they typically like to have the document as well prior to, so we would need to make sure that we gave the select board significant enough time to have the document
Yeah,
on which, so it may be a couple days, it might have to wait 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, unless anyone would object, that my inclination now is to schedule something, you know, a mid-February quick meeting of the HR board for the exclusive purposes of final review of this document and voting to move it forward to the select board. That would give us, say, 2 weeks before the select board's next meeting. We'll schedule it. I mean, in theory, we could do it
In theory,
to get on the agenda on the select board 2 weeks from tomorrow. And if we miss that deadline, your point is, let's not wait for the next HR board
as
meeting.
much as I wanna drag this
Yeah,
across
I
the
agree.
finish line, which I have said many times, like I
Right.
just want, I mean, this is, the draft went to town council back in October, and it has
Yeah.
gone through iterations and reviews
Right.
and delays,
Right.
and so as much as I wanna get this across the finish line, I know that the goal is to make sure that when it is done, it's right.
Right.
So whether it means we have to wait till the February 24th meeting, and we give them sufficient time, we get on the agenda, we just,
Yeah,
in maybe March, maybe it's, you
yeah,
know,
I
close.
prefer not to wait till March, but let's
Okay,
give it, to your point, let's give everybody an opportunity, including John and John, to read through the document, listen to changes or any concerns they may have, and go from there, so.
So I, of course, have another question.
Yep.
Do you ever do a workshop before the actual board meeting. And the reason that I'm asking is, you know, would a workshop allow us to meet kind of informally and maybe get a presentation on this? And, you know, you can talk to us, we can kind of discuss it, you know, outside of a actual board meeting, and then come back into the board meeting and, you know, ask and answer any final questions. But, you know, just, I mean, some of the questions that I'm asking, I feel like maybe, you know, might be more like workshop kind of, you know, questions.
I'm not sure, a workshop among the members of the HR board, or?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
I thought you meant the
and,
broader
you
population.
know, maybe Diane would, you know, like kind of talk to us a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I should take this offline.
So,
No,
the
fair
workshop,
question.
I think the workshop might be comparable to what we call a subcommittee meeting,
Okay,
if I would,
Yeah.
if you would agree. So when we drafted the document in the first place, we held many subsequent subcommittee meetings where we would go verse by chapter, verse by verse, and we would read through it and discuss. I mean, you recall
Yeah.
the many months of that. So we have done subcommittee meetings, and I think that's more or less what Mark might be referring to, if we scheduled a subcommittee meeting or another HR meeting. in
Yeah, I
a
think
couple
that would serve the purposes that you're referring to.
but then we would have to come back into a board meeting to vote on it,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
Right, or again, rather than call it, you know, we can create another meeting of the full HR board rather than calling it a subcommittee, as long as we don't run afoul of the open meeting laws.
Right.
Right,
Yeah, so what my experience has been that we would do, every month we would do a workshop, you know, and bring up these kinds of
right.
issues and topics, and have whoever's responsible kind of, you know, lead a discussion, you know,
Yeah.
show us PowerPoints, all of this stuff. And then we would convene into a board meeting and actually have our agenda, and, you know, so I feel like some of the questions I asked were a little bit informal, and, you know, maybe would be better addressed subcommittee, workshop, you know, meeting.
Yep.
I don't know, again, maybe I
well,
should have taken this offline and, you know, outside of this board
All right,
meeting.
well, let's do this, let's get through the second point,
Mhm.
since we're not gonna vote on this tonight anyways, and then we'll make a determination as to
what
next
we want
step,
to do to
so,
move forward.
is that good?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, and then.
Yeah, so I guess one more, if we're going to do a subcommittee meeting in 2 weeks, but then wait until the next board meeting, HR board meeting, to vote on it, that would be like 2 weeks later. And then possibly the select board meeting would be the next day. And so that wouldn't be enough time for them to really review and feel comfortable with it, right?
They'd have to have the document. I think they require the document a few days in
Yeah,
advance.
and again, to be clear, I don't believe that our voting on this informal straw poll vote, if you would have any impact on the timing of them getting the document. I don't think we need to vote on this informally as an HR board in order for the document to proceed forward to the select board. They can get it independent of what we're doing. We just wanna give it our blessing, if you will.
Right,
But there's no
exactly.
legal requirement for us to move it forward to the select board, so.
There's no legal requirement, but the language has to be fine. We need to present them with
Right.
a final document.
Right.
And if we're still discussing a few of these items, I think that needs to be decided before we send them the final
Yeah.
draft.
Well, that's why I was thinking that we could do this separate meeting sooner rather than later.
So
But
do
to
we have
answer Lynn's question, I think we can take a vote in that subcommittee meeting. We don't have to come back. It is,
Right.
we
Or
can,
come out of the subcommittee meeting and go into a formal board meeting, and then just vote on
Right,
what
we
we
can't vote as
discussed.
a subcommittee, correct.
right.
Right,
But we could
yeah.
just make it another HR board meeting. We
Yeah.
could- But your questions are pertinent, and because we have to have it in an open meeting,
Yep,
the questions are not, they're perfectly appropriate to be asking at this, at this meeting. It's
Right.
not like, because we can't have like a workshop that's not a public meeting.
right, yep.
Good. Okay,
Good.
thank you.
Okay,
And the
So-
second point?
the second point was, Tony, as you remember, one that we rehashed multiple times, page 18, where it talks about closures and employees who are dismissed from work early due to emergency situations. So Lynn, for your benefit, we have two types of employees. You may already be aware of this. We have exempt employees and non-exempt employees. Exempt employees are salaried, full-time, people who work extra hours, or they may, you know, if they're sent home early, they're still going to receive their full salary. Non-exempt employees who are on an hourly basis are affected by when we have closures. So if we have a closure because there's a significant snowstorm and we have to close for public safety, we send folks home, but the non-exempt employees who are hourly, in the past, based on this document, were required, they weren't gonna receive pay unless they used vacation time that was available to them, or we made arrangements so that individuals could make up the time. So if we left at, say, 12 o'clock because there was a state of emergency and there was bad weather, and Tracy made the decision that we needed to close, those employees who were scheduled to work till 4 o'clock had to make up those 4 hours over a period of time agreed upon by the department head, I believe, and the employee. So that was, we spent a lot of time talking about what we wanted to do with those folks, because it did happen, and there was some questions, and I think we even had some employees from one of the departments who came to us and really was questioning this and how it was impacting them. So we came to this agreement in the language that gave them additional time to make up the time. What came to my attention was something that's referred to as the Mass Reporting Law, or minimum wage, Department of Labor standards. So I get from time to time, as we talked about before, articles from our payroll company, Mass Municipal Association, there's a group called SHRM.
Yep.
So it came to my attention back in 2020, can we send, question came across one of the threads, can we send employees home early because there isn't any work to do? And I would assume that would apply to, can we send employees home early without paying them? And so it brought up the question that Massachusetts does have a reporting law. And so when we reviewed this document with town council, I asked specifically about the question, does this apply to the town of Newbury in this circumstance? And so the language that was added was, an employee dismissed from work early due to an emergency situation, the language added was, who is scheduled to work 3 or more hours and reports for duty on time shall be paid for at least 3 hours for that day at no less than their basic minimum wage in accordance with 454 CMR 2704-1. Now that is not a mass general law, it is a,
Regulation
yes,
that has the force and impact of law.
yes.
Right.
So 2704 paragraph 1 reads as follows. When an employee who is scheduled to work 3 or more hours reports for duty at the time set by the employer, and that employee is not provided with the expected hours of work, the employee shall be paid for at least 3 hours on such day at no less than the basic minimum wage. So that was discussed with town council, and that was the language that was added. So we're also leaving in the language that then refers to the fact that if they were scheduled to work 8 hours, they show up for work, we send them home, we pay them for 3, they're still at a 5-hour loss, so they can still make up those, say, 5 hours in accordance with the language listed here. And I know this is gonna be more of a discussion that we have to have, because the language reads they have to be paid for at least 3 hours. So are they paid for 3 hours and then they have to make up the 5? If they get sent home after the 3 hours, then we've already met the requirement that they're paid for 3 hours. So this is a little bit more of a conversation that needs to take place, but it was recommended that we add the language that refers to the labor standards. I don't know if I explained that properly, but that was the gist of it. Lynn, do you have any experience in this, or have you, or Tony, you're our legal guy?
Well, if there's an existing code of mass regs out there, then you gotta follow it.
Right.
No?
No.
So, so that I can understand, with these changes, are you hoping for a conversation today with us and then you're moving it forward to the select board? Or you said that it's going to require some additional conversation?
So my question to the board is, when this language came to me today, I said, okay, so if we have a circumstance where an employee shows up at 8 o'clock
Yeah.
and we send them home at 9, under the mass regs, we're required to pay them for 3 hours. They've shown up to work on time, they've worked an hour, we're gonna pay them for 3. They've missed out on 5 hours of work, so they're gonna have to make that time up. What happens if the office closes before we open and they haven't actually reported to work?
So did this just come to you today?
Well, it was a question that I had because, first of all, Mark, you can remember that this discussion on Thursday, they weren't even,
They weren't aware of it.
they weren't even aware of it. And I specifically asked the question about the labor standards law that was referenced in this article. So
Yeah.
when I got this language today, I said, well, what about the circumstance when we get the 7 o'clock text that says the office is closed due to inclement weather?
Right.
Is that considered that they've shown up for work?
I would like a little bit of time to kind of research this.
Right.
And you've done, you've got some research here, but is it urgent that we?
No.
No.
No, we weren't
Okay.
gonna move any of this language forward tonight.
Yeah,
so-
we're not moving any of this
Yeah.
forward based on our previous conversation,
Yeah.
but, and reasonably so for this specific reason, because when
Yeah.
I got this today, I was like, well, what happens when, because we have had circumstances where it's snowing like crazy, we have a call, a tree call, so
Yep.
Tracy will send the managers a text, we're closed today due to inclement weather. I then, tell my employees, every department informs. Would that be considered reporting for duty?
I don't-
Would they be required to be paid for 3 hours? Would they not?
Sure.
Yeah,
So there's that to
The,
be,
the spirit of it, when we created this a couple of years ago, this came to us, Lynn, and Tony may recall, it was specific to emergency, weather closings. And I don't recall at that time there being any language indicating somebody had to report for work, because often there was no work to report to. The town administration made the decision at 5 in the morning because of a raging blizzard that the offices weren't gonna be open that day.
but
So
if you remember, under that scenario, they had to make up all 8 hours.
Right.
So it
yeah.
didn't matter whether they reported or they didn't, because they had to
Mhm.
make up their regularly worked
Right.
schedule.
Yeah, I'm not referring to the number of hours, just the fact that the language now says, and reported on time. And I don't recall that being part of the,
No, because the office was closed.
Right.
And they would have to make up the time anyway.
right.
Is it on here now?
This is stating that if you report for duty on time, and reports for duty on time shall be paid for at least 3 hours. So I did have the opportunity to ask town council about that today, and he said, well, if they don't report for duty, then you're not obligated under the Fair State Labor Standard Acts. And I personally would say that probably, I mean, the spirit of the law, as Tony said, is that they're losing their hours, there would be no reporting.
Right.
And town council said, you can make the decision to do whatever you want.
Right.
However, the labor standards are that if someone reports for work, they have to be paid for 3
Right.
hours. If we as a board or we as the town decides the office is closed, we're going to pay you for a minimum of 3 hours, we can certainly do that. We're
Right.
still meeting the Fair State
Right.
Labor Standards. But as a town or as a board, we can also say that if, we don't have to say reports for duty, we can say,
That was my point.
right, that was, right, yeah.
Right. We may want to strike that language. So again, we've got lots more to consider in both of these subjects, and I would recommend that,
Mhm.
And your references were SHRM,
Well, I had gotten an article from our payroll company,
okay?
and there's someone who responded to the question who referenced the Massachusetts states with reporting time pay. And I'm assuming that that references this, because that's what town council then brought in. And they included Massachusetts, which raised the question, and Tracy and I had talked about it, and I said, well, when we go to review the document, we'll have town council we'll ask the question specifically of them.
Yeah. I
But
wonder,
to answer your question, it was someone from SPHR. I don't know the acronym, I'm just more familiar with.
SPHR?
So I'm an SPHR.
Okay.
That is just a certification, international, worldwide certification. And, but if it came from SHRM, you know, that's the body of work, yeah.
Yeah.
The Society of Human Resource Management, and then SPHR is a senior professional in human resources. So I've been an SPHR for.
Okay.
I wonder if,
So it did not come from them, but it was raised by the payroll company, but someone from with one of those designations responded to the question.
Okay.
Which then raised the question with Tracy and I, which we raised with town council, and then they came back with the labor standards that they felt should be addressed in this section.
Okay.
I wonder if given the language questions we have in both of these subject matters, if it might be wise to schedule this session we're going to have in the next couple of weeks, and perhaps ask town council to zoom in, ask somebody from town council to zoom in with us, rather than run the risk of kicking it further down the road by then, you know, referring questions from that meeting onto town council. Maybe we can arrange to have somebody from town council available for half an hour, 45 minutes on Zoom for the purposes of discussing both of these, getting the language clearer, cleaning up whatever we think is appropriate, and then take the vote from there.
I agree with that. You know, these kinds of things can certainly come back, you know, with inquiries from employees.
Right, no
And-
question.
And if we are not, you know, comfortable with what we're supporting going forward, you know, then it's gonna come back to us and we're
Right.
gonna be kind of questioning our own.
Right, and I think I can speak for the members of the select board, thinking that they would appreciate final clarification on all this stuff. You know, none of them have legal training, and so I would think that they would want to be sure that the town council has given us not only the language, but all the guidance necessary surrounding the language to make sure we're comfortable.
So how does town council fit into this organization?
Well, if we had our organizational chart, we would.
That's another story for another meeting.
So, town council handles any sort of legal matters, anything having to do with documents like this, contracts, certain questions that arise with public records inquiries. But when it comes to a document like this, obviously, when we drafted it, we had it reviewed by town council because of the legal ramifications. So,
Are they employees?
so they are not an employee, they're contracted by the town,
They are contracted?
yes.
Right.
Okay, do they have legal backgrounds?
Oh, it's, yes,
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yes.
Yeah, no, they're all subject matter experts in one shape, form, or another on municipal law, open meeting law, employment law, and everything that wraps around it.
yes.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, I mean, we can certainly try to do that and have one of them zoom in when we decide when our meeting is. I think if we're going to do that, we need to be very specific about what our questions are and what we think we want to do.
Right.
And I think just in the case of the one that we just discussed, when I asked him about, well, what happens on a day when we just close, his answer was, well, you can certainly have whatever, you can set whatever your rules and regulations are, but keeping in mind that this is the minimum requirement.
Yeah, they want to make sure that the legal minimums are offered and adhered to.
So I don't think looking to them to tell us what we as a board want to recommend.
I'm just referring to the language, not the spirit.
Okay.
But it begins, but it begins an employee dismissed from work. There's your fact pattern. They're in here,
Well,
they got in,
or they
and
dismiss before
now
the
they're
day
dismissed
starts.
from work due to emergency situation,
Right.
which presupposes that you know, that it didn't have to happen that way, but it did happen. What we're talking about, I think, is if, you know, we've got 27 inches of snow on the ground, and early on, you know, Tracy says, oh, we can't do this, we have to close up shop or something like that, whatever she says. So that's entirely different,
Right.
I think, and that may be, you know, that can be amplified in here.
Right, and I think that's what more or less town council was stating to me, because I said oftentimes it's just we're closed for the day because of weather. And he said, well, under that circumstance, I don't believe that you would have to compensate them for those 3 hours. But, and he's made the comment, but you could make the decision that you know, if an employee is dismissed from work or that the office is closed, they will be paid for 3 hours. You're still in compliance with the law, but you're making the decision that, so.
Right, but that's not what the language says.
No, I know that's not what the
Right,
language says, but my point is that if we're gonna involve town council with this board, I
Understood.
think we need to, as a board, sort of have a general idea what our questions are and,
Right.
and as a board, what do we wanna recommend?
Yep.
Keeping in mind that we need to follow the labor standards.
Right. I mean, I would think that whatever vote we ultimately take is gonna be strictly on the language that sits in front of us, not what the intention is, should something fall outside of that language.
I can see what's going to happen. I can see that someone's gonna say, I was told not to come to work today, I should be paid for 3
Right.
hours.
Understood. Yeah, and
That's-
town
this-
council's gonna say that's an independent decision that the town of Newbury needs to make with its employees, but it sits outside of the regulations that map to the language that we've created, right? I mean, town council's already indicated that what we wanna do above and beyond that is up to the town.
Right.
They're just talking about the minimum requirements.
The
Should some-
language, he specifically said, the language reads, when an employee who is scheduled to work 3 or more hours reports for duty at the time set by the employer, and that employee is not provided with the expected hours of work, the employee shall be paid for at least 3 hours on such day at no less than the basic minimum wage. That does not speak to if the office is closed. He's saying he doesn't think that applies. And that all hours would need to be made up.
And we've already got beyond that with our current policy, so.
Well,
We don't require somebody to report for duty
Right.
if the office is closed, that's the,
right.
okay. Oh, we got it cleaned up.
So, the rest of the document, and I appreciate that everyone just got it at 1 o'clock, but the rest of the document is town administrator, it's wordsmithing.
Right.
But there may also be things that will come up for questions, so I think, what if we schedule another meeting
In advance of our next,
in advance of our next meeting?
yeah,
And-
without
and-
getting specific about times and dates, you folks okay with the prospect of scheduling a special meeting for the purposes of reviewing this language further and coming up with recommendations?
I'm fine with it.
I'm fine with it. Are we just looking at these two?
Oh, if you have questions on, the rest of it is mostly just, like I said, changing
It's
select
wordsmithing.
board
Yep.
from board of select.
But it's excellent nighttime reading, Lynn,
Yeah.
so please feel free to pour through every one of those
I have
63
my
pages.
Couple of hours of health stream training that's due the end of this week too. That would be my.
Well, let's just
bedtime.
say at a minimum to discuss these two matters a little bit
Okay.
further.
These
and
are
then-
the two substantive issues that need to be addressed in this document. The rest of it is rudimentary in terms of select board.
Modernizing language
Yeah.
based on town administrator.
And that's the whole policy manual?
Yep, and I emailed the entire red line version today.
Okay, all right. Yeah, apologies, I didn't
All right,
get
so
a
let me
chance to
work
look
on,
at it.
scheduling that. I understand that we don't know what people can commit to at this point, but what I will do is, we do not run afoul of open meeting law if I'm communicating with everyone by email just for the purposes of scheduling. We're not gonna be discussing the matter, we're not gonna be letting everybody know how each of us feel about the two subjects. I will communicate with everyone strictly for the purposes of scheduling a meeting. This will be the subject,
Oh, okay,
this will be the date, yeah.
okay.
And I know it's gonna be like herding cats, but I'll work through that, and we'll come up with a date sometime over the next week or 10 days where everyone can grab another 45 minutes or an hour. And go
Okay,
through it.
I'm just looking at my calendar. Next week is pretty booked for me,
Okay,
but it's starting the 7th, so that is 2 weeks from today. You know, I'm back to a regular schedule.
the week of the 7th, okay?
Yep.
Tony, you know, generally you're on that week? Diane, you're here?
It's so funny, that is the one week, I am here that Monday, but I will be gone Tuesday through Friday. I'm actually taking some vacation time.
Okay. So if,
That Monday I'm here.
so you thinking maybe on the 7th could work for
I
you,
could,
that day?
I definitely will be here on the 7th.
I've got commitments that morning from 9 to 12, other than that, I'm free in the afternoon, Monday the 7th,
I'm all set for the 7th.
you're on? The 7th is generally a good day for you?
Yes.
All right, so let me work towards the 7th, does everyone still prefer 4 PM, or?
That's a good time for me.
Fine.
All right, so why don't we, those of us in here, let's pencil in the 7th at 4 PM. And I will work to...
I will check with town council and see if they're available that day.
Okay, and I'll immediately let John and John know, and I know Tracy's out, she's on vacation, right?
Yep.
But I'll leave her a note as well, and we'll go from there, so, okay.
2/7 at
Thank
4
you all.
o'clock, and I will contact legal counsel.
How far in advance do you have to advertise a meeting?
48 hours?
48 hours?
Yeah. Yeah. I did not have anything else on today's agenda. Diane, did you?
So the two things that were on the minutes from last meeting, the organizational chart is moving forward.
Right.
I was hoping to have a draft today, but with this before us, I figured we should just
Priority, yeah.
push that off to the next meeting. That'll be the next big hurdle to get across, and then the update on the email.
Yeah, the email, just very quickly, I did have the email changed, worked through Matt Cooper, the IT manager on that, so the email is now generic. When we meet on the 7th, we can vote on the second step of the process, which is, as you pointed out last month, should it automatically go to everybody, or should I continue to do what I've been doing for the last few years, which is review the very infrequent email that comes into the HR board, and based on confidentiality, based on sensitivity, make a decision whether it needs to be kept close by, or whether it needs to be distributed to the rest of the board. The good news is we've never had the circumstance that has required, that to go to the full board, and I don't expect that's going to change, but nonetheless, it's something we should cover in advance. So the new email is town of Newbury HR board HR board at townofnewbury.org.
Okay.
So,
And that's replacing his personal.
replacing it.
Good.
So,
And
That's
we did check, the select board operates much in the same way, where
Right.
one person receives the email and determines the dissemination of information
Right.
from there.
Yeah, we can give the entire board the opportunity just to weigh in on that matter when we meet, hopefully on the 7th, so. With that in mind, if there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
HR board at townofnewbury.org. And who receives that? Okay,
It's forwarded to me at that point,
okay.
and then I would make that decision, as I do. At Diane point, that's what I've been doing for the last few years, there hasn't been any decision to make, fortunately. But in theory, I would be making the decision whether to disseminate it immediately or hold it close for whatever reason, so.
Okay.
Alrighty. I'm sorry, was there a motion to adjourn? Did I miss that?
Make a motion?
Second?
Second?
Any discussion? Hearing none, we are adjourned. And I will get to everybody as soon as possible regarding the 7th as that special meeting. Thank you all.